you today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, busy as ever, but I'm excited opening up my retreat. Go to EleanorsRetreat.com, all lower level, EleanorsRetreat.com, and check us out. This is a really fascinating place. We have an 1889 house that has been totally redone because we'll explain later. This is an 1855 barn that's been completely redone into my studio, quilt retreat, or you can rent it for a special venue. Something going on special in your family, there's 1,000 square feet to rent. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of quilts, because I don't think a lot of people understand about quilting. A lot of people say, oh, my grandmother did it. Oh, that was such a fun hobby. Yeah, they used to do that in America. Folks, let me tell you, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yes, I said multi-billion, and it is growing by leaps and bounds. Not only has it became a strong American, international, United States way for women to express and use things and make things that were uniquely American, it is now international. Next part, we will talk a little bit about how it became international. First, let's talk a little bit about how it got started here in the United States. What do you know about it?
Not a whole lot. I do know about the Underground Railroad and that they had used quilts to signify the stops along the way. But honestly, that and that my grandma made quilts.
Here's a picture of a quilt.
Okay.
With the about, please save us.
Okay.
So things like that. We're going to talk about that in another podcast, exactly about what it was like to use quilts and how they used them.
Awesome.
Okay, but right now, let me tell you a little bit about the quilts have been around for thousands of years, literally thousands of years. A quilt is 3 pieces of material. It is the top, it is the back, and the center is some type of what we call batting today. It was old blankets. It was whatever you had that was kind of thick to put the 2 pieces of material on top, then sewn together. That's what gave quilts their warmth, was the 3. If you only have 2, that's a duvet or just a blanket. A quilt must be 3 to be an actual quilt.
Okay.
Yeah. So, of course, it used to be only wealthy women in Europe could afford quilts. The servants made them. The servants started what they call a cottage industry at home, would make them and sell them. So when they came to the United States in the early 1600s, 1700s, they brought this knowledge with them because it wasn't the wealthy women coming, it was the women who actually made them. In America, it became very practical. Unfortunately, we have no quilts from the very early times. We just know from diaries and records that they did make them. The earliest ones are from the 1800s, is what they have in museums and Smithsonian and such. But we know that originally they were made. Quilts were made from what people had, which was old clothing, things people had outgrown. Everything was used, reused, and then used again. There's an old Yankee saying that goes, eat it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. That was the philosophy of the time, and women did this. They needed warmth. It was very cold, obviously, in New England. They needed means to care for their family. Quilts became a means to do it. They could sit at night by candlelight, or during the day when they had time. They would piece together small pieces. Some of them were 1 to 2 inches. Whatever they could find that was left over, till it was big enough to go on a bed, which was normally a single or double size. There was no such thing as queens or kings then. Then they would use whatever horse blanket, anything that they could put in the center, and the back could have been an old dress, an old blanket, anything. Then they would have what they call the bees. You've heard of quilting bees, where you see women sitting around this large frame. That's where the 3 pieces are put together, and everybody sits around and they sew them together. Multiple ways, that would be another discussion, and that's what a quilting bee. But the quilting bee did more than that, especially as we went west. We went west for the men to have land, for a place for people to build a farm or become a rancher. Women just went along and was part of it. They raised the children, they helped with it, but their only expression of who they are, the true artists within them, was through the quilts. While making a quilt, many of them made quilts that expressed how they felt. Some of them showed profound happiness with pieces or squares that had light and bright, and it showed color, it showed dimension. Other times they were depressed, and they used blacks and grays, and you knew something was going on in their life simply by what they chose to use. Most of those quilts, they could tell you which piece came from what, from which child. Many times, also, 1 in 3 children died. They were used to bury their children with these. They became very personalized. They were also the way women expressed. People say, such a nice hobby. It's such a nice craft. No, this is a form of art. This is absolute art. And then as our country became a little more affluent, people would actually buy material, especially after the gins, the cotton gins. The material became much cheaper, and they started making it in New England in the factories. Even the poorer people could buy material. They started making quilts that were for the beauty or the aesthetic, not just for the practicality of it. And they also, you can follow the history of the United States within every single quilt. Some quilts, this is a bicentennial quilt. It just, everybody made a square, it was assembled, and it's telling a bicentennial quilt for Florida. Quilts tell a history. They tell the history of the times. We have quilts of people from the time of Deliver Me from the Oppression. And this is a picture that would have been in the newspaper, and then she hand sewed little pieces of material and made this quilt. So quilts very much tell the story of this country. They tell as we go by. It was quilts and other homemade items that supported the Civil War. On both sides, women held quilting bees. Women got organizations together. They made clothing. When the men needed uniforms, they were made by the women and sent to them. Many men had a quilt made by a wife, a mother, someone within their family. That was their only means of warmth, and if they died, they were buried. Few quilts came back home. Here's one of a woman who is surviving cancer, and she's expressing herself within her quilt. They are truly an artistic. This, by the way, is a book by Quilts, A History and Celebration of American Art Form by Lisa Schuber Roberts. And it's just one of hundreds of books you can get. You can find many things on YouTube. This is just an overall expression. There's multiple types of quilts. Quilts have been anything from one solid piece of material to dozens of small pieces, which is called a crazy quilt, to applique, which is something sewn on top of the quilt. They are as different and as varied as women are. And then for a while, they became a little less popular as women had the ability to go to work after World War II, had the opportunity to express themselves in other ways. Quilting was not done as a necessity anymore. However, in the 80s, there was a bit of a revival because a woman named Eleanor Burns came up with what she called this strip method, revolutionized quilting. No more did you have to sit there and just cut. It just zipped right along, zipped on the other side, and boom. She called it stripping. Women got to strip publicly now. And she made what was called a quilt in a day. And that's kind of when I got started, was with Eleanor Burns' Quilt in the Days. I love those quilts. And I taught classes on them because you can make a quilt, a twin-size quilt, literally in a day. Well, if you did nothing else that day. And then when that became popular, it began to expand. Quilts also have a sense of storytelling. This is one called Stitching Stores. Is the story of quilts of Harriet Bowers. And the book is written by Mary E. Loynes. This is a woman who was a slave. And when she finally was free after escaping slavery, she literally made a book of Bible stories that she remembered. All of her books, this is Adam and Eve. All of her quilts were about the Bible. Everything was about how amazing life is, even though she started life as a slave. Quilts tell a story. They tell the story of the United States of America. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It's all in there. It's in every woman's quilt. Today, women quilt for the love of it because it's a way of saying who you are and leaving a mark. Today, there are thousands of quilt guilds, literally thousands, in the United States, where women gather together and visit and socialize. They're predominantly with white women right now, but it is expanding. Luckily, there's many Afro-American groups. There's also LBQT groups, and I'm glad to see that because quilting should be for everybody. It's not for one particular group because we all express ourselves differently. We all have a story to tell, and that's what quilting is. Telling a story, telling your story, telling the story of your country or your town or your family. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this. We're going to do more. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the quilts I've made and what type of quilts that they're called and the specialty of these quilts. You all have a wonderful day, and we'll talk later. Bye.